Frederick Douglass was never meant to be remembered. That was the unspoken assumption of the system that enslaved him. He was born into a world carefully designed to erase him before he could ever exist fully as a human being. Sometime in February of 1818, on a plantation in Talbot County, Maryland, he entered a life that did not record birthdays, did not preserve names, and did not value memory. Enslaved people were denied even the basic markers of existence. Time itself belonged to others. History was written elsewhere, by other hands. His mother, Harriet Bailey, was enslaved on a different plantation. He saw her only a handful of times, usually at night, when she would walk miles after exhausting labor just to sit beside her child for a few stolen moments before returning before dawn. Those brief visits were acts of quiet defiance. She died when Frederick was still young, and like most enslaved children, he was not allowed the space to grieve.
Slavery did not permit emotional continuity. Love was dangerous. Attachment created weakness. Every relationship was designed to be temporary, every bond intentionally fragile. Frederick never knew his father. He was told the man was white, possibly the plantation owner. This was not unusual. Sexual violence was not a deviation from slavery, it was a pillar of it. Power expressed itself not only through whips and chains but through domination of bodies and bloodlines. The children produced by that violence were living evidence of contradiction, born of the system, owned by it, erased by it. From an early age, Frederick understood that slavery was not merely physical confinement. It was psychological warfare. It was the constant repetition of a single lie, that some people were born to rule and others were born to serve. This lie was enforced through violence, deprivation, fear, and most critically, ignorance. Knowledge was dangerous. Thinking was subversive. When Frederick was sent to Baltimore to live with Hugh and Sophia Auld, the trajectory of his life shifted. Sophia Auld, unfamiliar with the rigid codes of slavery, began teaching him the alphabet. It was not an act of rebellion at first, just a human impulse. But when her husband discovered what she was doing, his reaction was immediate and furious. He warned her that education would make a slave unfit for bondage. That literacy would make him unmanageable. That knowledge would destroy his obedience. Frederick later wrote that in that moment, the entire system of slavery revealed itself to him. If education was forbidden, it was because education was freedom. Ignorance was not accidental. It was policy. Denied formal instruction, Frederick taught himself. He traded bread with poor white children in exchange for reading lessons. He studied newspapers, political speeches, discarded books. Words became his sanctuary and his weapon. Through reading, he discovered that slavery was not natural, not inevitable, not ordained. It was constructed, defended by falsehoods, and sustained by force. But knowledge also brought pain. The more Frederick learned, the more unbearable slavery became. Literacy sharpened his awareness of injustice while offering no immediate escape. He later described this stage as both a blessing and a curse. To see the truth without the power to change one's condition was torment. As he grew older, he was sent to work under Edward Covey, a notorious slave breaker. Covey specialized in crushing resistance. He used relentless violence, surveillance, and psychological manipulation to break the spirits of enslaved people who showed independence. Frederick was beaten regularly, starved, overworked, and humiliated. His body was targeted, but his will was the true objective. Then one day, something changed. When Covey attempted to whip him again, Frederick resisted. What followed was a violent struggle that lasted nearly 2 hours. Covey was shocked. Frederick fought back with everything he had. Covey never whipped him again. That moment became central to Douglass's understanding of freedom. He later said that while the fight did not free his body, it freed his soul. He had proven to himself that he was not what slavery claimed him to be. In 1838, at the age of 20, Frederick Douglass escaped slavery. Disguised as a sailor and carrying borrowed papers, he fled north. For years, he concealed the details of his escape to protect others. Freedom, he learned, was not a destination. It was a condition that had to be defended. He settled in New Bedford, Massachusetts, married Anna Murray, a free black woman who had helped finance his escape, and began rebuilding his life. There, he encountered the organized abolitionist movement. He listened more than he spoke at first, absorbing the language, the arguments, the strategies. In 1841, at an abolitionist convention in Nantucket, Frederick Douglass was asked to speak. Nervous and uncertain, he told his story. The audience was stunned. Here was a man who had been enslaved, who spoke with clarity, intelligence, and moral authority. William Lloyd Garrison, the most prominent white abolitionist in America, was present. He immediately recognized Douglass's power. Douglass was hired as a lecturer and sent across the North to speak. Crowds gathered to hear him describe the realities of slavery. His testimony was powerful, but it came with constraints. White abolitionists encouraged him to focus on his suffering. To provide facts. To bear witness. They did not want analysis. They did not want philosophy. They wanted him as evidence, not as an equal. Douglass noticed this tension early. His intellect unsettled audiences. Some doubted he had ever been enslaved because he spoke too eloquently. Others accused him of memorizing speeches written by white men. The implication was clear: brilliance was not expected in a black man. Even allies were uncomfortable with his independence. They wanted his voice, but within boundaries they controlled. In 1845, Douglass published Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. The book was an immediate success. It exposed slavery with devastating clarity and sold thousands of copies. But its success placed him in danger. By naming names and locations, he risked recapture. He traveled to Britain, where supporters raised money to legally purchase his freedom. The transaction was a bitter irony: a man had to be bought to be free. But it allowed him to return without immediate threat. By the late 1840s, Douglass had outgrown the role assigned to him. He wanted agency. He wanted to shape ideas, not just repeat experiences. In 1847, he moved to Rochester, New York, and announced he would start his own newspaper, the North Star. The decision fractured his relationship with William Lloyd Garrison. Garrison viewed the paper as competition and betrayal. His own publication, The Liberator, dominated abolitionist discourse. He believed a competing paper would divide the movement. But Douglass understood something deeper. Even among abolitionists, white allies expected black people to remain supporting characters in their own liberation. They wanted Douglass to speak, to inspire, to authenticate, but not to lead. Not to define strategy. Not to challenge assumptions. By founding the North Star, Douglass claimed control over the narrative. His writing was extraordinary. He addressed political philosophy, constitutional law, international relations, women's rights, and economic theory. He refused to be reduced to a single-issue activist. He became dangerous, not as a symbol, but as an intellectual force. In 1852, he was invited to speak at a 4th of July celebration in Rochester. His speech, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July," became one of the greatest orations in American history. He praised the founders, then dismantled the mythology of freedom. He exposed hypocrisy with devastating logic. "What to the American slave is your 4th of July?" he asked. A day that reveals to him more than all other days in the year the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. The audience sat in silence as he dismantled every comforting illusion of American liberty. He spoke of brutality, law, and complicity. He ended with a call not for patience, but for upheaval. For it is not light that is needed, but fire. Southern newspapers called for his arrest. Northern papers debated whether he had gone too far. But no one could refute him. His intellect was a weapon they could not confiscate. During the Civil War, Douglas advised President Abraham Lincoln. He advocated for black soldiers and the Emancipation Proclamation. He helped recruit troops for the 54th Massachusetts. He understood that images mattered too, becoming one of the most photographed Americans of the century to challenge racist caricature. After the war, he fought for the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. He served in government positions, wrote multiple autobiographies, and continued lecturing into his 70s. On February 20, 1895, Frederick Douglass collapsed at his home after attending a meeting for women's rights. He died a free man, surrounded by family. Even in death, attempts were made to diminish him, calling him an exception, a credit to his race. They could not accept the truth his life proved. Intelligence, dignity, and brilliance are not distributed by race. His grave bears one word, freedom. But his true monument is not stone. It is the knowledge he left behind. The understanding that education is liberation. That systems of oppression collapse when people learn to speak, write, think, and resist. The work he began is unfinished. Every generation must choose between comfortable lies and uncomfortable truths.